today I'm going to talk about the different ways you can summarize your data. So we'll be talking primarily about the sum function, the SUMIF function, and the SUMIFS function. So let's crack on. First thing that we're going to do is we have a data source here with basically our sales data and every product that we sell across different categories. So the first thing we want to do is we want to summarize this data by our categories. So the first thing I need to do here is actually get a list of the categories. The easiest and quickest way to do this is to actually insert a quick pivot table on just column A and select that, and then pull the categories into the rows. This will then give us a full list of categories that I can then paste down as values, and then we can delete the pivot table from our workbook. So let's wait for the process. Now we have a list of all of the categories that are within our data set, and we want to first of all look at the sum function. So we just want the sum of total sales. Now you could, in theory, actually just use a pivot table to do this if all you're after is a total value by category, which is one way to go. Or alternatively, we can do a SUMIF function. So in order to do that, we'd actually just open up an equal sign, type in SUMIF, open bracket. Now we have three key functions or parts to the function. The first one is the range. The range can be the sum range, the range that you want to actually summarize, or can be a criteria range. So in this example, we use it as a criteria range, and then the criteria will be in our lookup table just here, so our advent. And then if we hit comma again, we can actually then add in, which is the optional part of the formula, the sum range, which would be I. Now if I close that down and press enter, we can now see that this is a summarized account of everything within our data table for advent. And because we have not, or we have selected entire columns, we can just anchor in the column letters here, which is again optional because we're only going to pull it down, not we're going to pull the formula down the rows rather than to the right across columns. So it was an optional thing. We didn't have to anchor in all of those, but there we have. Okay, so now this shows us our entire account by category. Now, obviously, a lot of people are probably familiar with the auto sum function, which in essence is just sum, and then you can highlight your entire range here. And now that gives us a total account of sales across all of the categories. Now, the next part to this, so that this function is a SUMIF. Now, what if you wanted to have multiple different criteria? And that's where the SUMIFS function comes in. So let's say you want to know the sales of products that have a greater than £40 price tag. Okay, let me just put that in there. So we'd use a SUMIFS function for this. So everything that has a price tag of greater than £40, we want to be able to summarize our total sales, right? But we also want to keep it within our category. So the way we would do that would be equals SUMIFS. Again, so it's the same as a SUMIF, but with the S. And the S basically symbolizes that you can have multiple criteria. slightly different structure. So this time we have the sum range as the first part of the formula. So we'd select column I in this example, hit comma, and then we have a criteria range. Now the first criteria range has to be our category, and then our criteria is in our table just here. Now, if we hit comma again, we get a second criteria range, which in this example will be our price index. And then we hit comma again. What is the criteria? We want it to be greater than 40. Okay, and then we can close that, press enter. Oh, sorry, need to put these into quotations just here. Press enter. And now Advent, if I just change it into currency, has total sales in Advent is 49,000, but for products that are over £40, it's only £6,000 worth of sales. Okay, and again, we can just copy that all the way down. We can copy this one across, and we now have, for every single category, the sales of items that are over £40, which equates to, in essence, just under 50% of total sales. Right, so this particular kind of formula is very useful if you wanted to do multiple different criteria for summing a range. But same thing can apply for counts as well, but you might also want to say, okay, well, what if we want to summarize something that is greater than £10 but less than 40? We'd have a couple of extra criteria in here. So we would go SUMIFS open. Our sum range is I. Our criteria range to start with will be the category. So we'll put that in. And then our second criteria is the price index. And then our criteria on that has to be greater than 10 and less than 40. Okay, we'll have to probably do that as a third criteria. There we go. Okay, so that then shows us everything that is greater than 10 but less than 40. Okay, we can copy that down and that will work all the way through. And now we can go across here. So these are pretty basic and simple formulas, but very useful when you want to know how your data is performing within certain ranges, or less than or greater than, and any other kind of ways of summarizing that you wouldn't normally get within a pivot table. So for example, if you were to put this into a pivot, you could only generally get the main, well, I can show you. So if I just select my data source here, put a pivot table in. I tend not to use pivot tables all that much, mainly because I find them more restrictive than the actual formulas that you can create. But we can put total sales into our values now. By default, this is probably going to sum it. Yeah. So now we have the sum, which is the same as this first column. We can obviously go into our field settings, and these are the functions that you have. You have the ability to sum it. We can count, we can average, we can max, we can min, the product, we can count the numbers, whatever these ones are. We can just change that into currency. But what you can't do is change this criteria to be the sum between a range. And that's where these other SUMIF formulas really come into their own. But all in all, that is how you perform the sum function. So it's quite simple, sum and then the range of what you're looking for. And AutoSum will do the same thing. Okay, they're exactly the same. People sometimes do things like this, and they go sum that one, that one, that one, that one, with a comma just between each range that they're trying to sum. Alternatively, a lot of people just equals that plus that plus that plus and so on, right? And they create these long-winded strings that look like this, which break so quickly and easily. And it's one clear way that you're kind of wasting a lot of time doing things like that, and it's just much easier if you use the functions that are built into Excel. Okay, so this is the sum function, and again you have the ability to use the AutoSum. We've talked about the SUMIF function, and there's two different ways you can do that. So there's the SUMIF just using criteria as the range that you're trying to sum, and then the criteria of, let's say, greater than 10. I always forget to put it into quotation marks when you start doing it like this. Now, obviously, you can do greater than a cell reference as well. But you can sum that way rather than this formula, which uses 3 parts, because we were using the column A and column K as our reference, right? So we're using a SUMIF with one criteria and a sum range, whereas this SUMIF only uses the sum range and the criteria. So there's 2 different ways to do that one. And then there is the SUMIFS function, which lets you have multiple criteria for every, well, almost anything within your data. So we could have said sum everything by category within column I, but also price tag by the discount, how many products we sold, what the quantity was. We could do summarization on any of those variables. So that's that one there, and we've chosen to do a few examples of showing how we do a SUMIF between 2 ranges, so greater than 10, less than 40, and what that comes down to. And one last one I guess I can just show you guys is how to use cell references within your formulas as well. So, right, so we can say, let me think, let's say 10 there and 40 here. Then, so the same way that we would use this formula, right? So we would have said SUMIFS, open bracket, our sum range is I. Our first criteria range is going to be the category name and then the category name itself as our criteria. Our criteria 2 has to be our price here, and we want it to be so open bracket, quotation, greater than, close quotation, and symbol, our criteria that is in O2. Comma gets us to our third criteria, which again is our price tag. Comma gets us to our criteria, quotations less than, close quotations, ampersand, and P2, close brackets. This now uses the same formula structure that we did in here, but this time we're using cell references for our formula, right? So rather than just saying greater than 10, we say greater than 10 in O2, right? So in our cell 02, we can now change that, and we can change the criteria by changing those particular references. So now it's between 15 and 40, or 15 and 30, and that will change that sum function. Okay, now the important thing here is you can't just copy this down, you'd have to anchor in your cell references. So we'll anchor in the numbers, and for argument's sake, we can anchor in the letters as well. And then we can copy this formula down, and now we can do a SUMIFS function based on criteria that we can now change. So we can say between 10 and 30, and that will update all of those formulas dynamically. We can hit the auto sum. Now, because that's a number, it's going to try to include it. So we'll instead just select the criteria that we actually want. And that is it, guys. It's pretty basic. There's not really too many moving parts to it. Any questions, let me know. Feel free to leave a comment below and any other suggestions that you may have. And I will see you in another video.